I'm here today. Sharon asked me a few weeks ago to do a presentation here, and before I came into this, I knew that I was a passionately creative person. And in writing this and being involved in this, I've learned another aspect, and that is that, I'm a passionately creative Fijian, and the Fijian factor, I sort of learnt about this in doing this presentation. I remember my first creative moment, actually. I was about 6 years old, and in Suva, and Dad worked for Air Pacific in those days, and he was the in-flight catering manager. And he came home one day, very excited with the new colour scheme for Air Pacific, and I think a lot of you remember it was the blue, red, orange, and yellow. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. The blue was the Pacific, the red was the sunset, that sort of thing, and I thought it was fantastic. And we were talking about it, and I noticed he had a coaster, drinking coaster. And I thought it was pretty boring. It was just a blue stripe around the coaster with the logo on it. And I thought, I'll do something with this. And I got out I didn't have crayons, I actually had textures. It's interesting how hearing previous speakers. And I drew the blue, the red, and the yellow in the concentric stripes around the coaster, and showed it to Dad, and Dad, of course, was like, oh, that's great, son, that's terrific. And I was like, wow, I'm creative. And he actually took the design to work, and they actually did produce it into the coaster at the time. So that was like a double wow, I'm creative, I've validated, my dad approves, and I got a whole lot of instant gratification at that one moment. And so from there on, I was creative, and I've always been creative. It wasn't until I went to Australia when I was 13 did I question more than just my creativity. I was born in Suva, as I said before, and I'm fourth generation Fiji born. So my great-great-great-grandparents on my father's side, they came out from Scotland and settled into Nandi eventually. And on my mother's side, they came out from Sweden and settled in Levuka, and they formed a shopping chain called Morris Hedstrom's, which everyone still knows today. So Fiji's very much part of who I am and how I identify myself. But I'd never really had that called into question until I went to Australia when I was 13. And I remember going to school in Queensland, it was about 1983, and because I had a bit of a different accent, everyone just said, oh, you're a POM. And I was like, no, I'm from Fiji. No, you can't be from Fiji, you're not black. And I was like, well, I am. And this story is a very long story that goes on repeatedly throughout my life. I'm not the generational thing, blah, blah, blah. And then they said, oh, well, you must be rich, you're posh, and which is ironic, because I was in a private school. But that was because I used to come home to Fiji on school holidays and that sort of thing. So I was like a posh POM. That was my nickname. But where I found solace in that was in being creative and being artistic, and I was really excelled in art at school. And largely it was because I drew on my Fiji experience and, the tropical colours of Fiji and the flora, the fauna. And in 1987, the coup in Fiji came into my artwork. I was doing sort of conflicts of racial division in my artwork and all that sort of naive stuff. But it's how I said who I was and where I was from, and it was very much from the heart. So that was sort of got me through. When I left school, I decided to go to England, and I did a working holiday thing there, and I went back to Australia, and I decided to do textile design, which was in RMIT in Melbourne. And I excelled in all that sort of thing. I loved it. And after that, I went to move to Sydney, and I started my own business doing hand-printed fabrics for interiors, because I had a strong interior design influence as well. And it didn't work. I struggled with it. I couldn't sell my stuff, and basically the business failed. And looking back on that now, I can see why it failed, because I was being creative, but I was catering to the Australian market or whatever market that was. And it was sort of like trying to be Western, trying to fit in. And obviously now, looking at it, I wasn't being authentic to myself. And I think in many reasons that's why it didn't succeed. And after that, I had to earn a living in Sydney. So I worked for an interior design shop and furniture retailer, and I basically gave up on being creative for about 6 or 7 years living in Sydney. And they were good years in some respects, and I had a good social life, and I sort of focused on the social life more than anything else. But by the year 2000, by the time I turned 30, I realized I was going nowhere. I was not being true to myself and not being at all creative, and I was absolutely at my wit's end what to do. And in the back of my head, obviously, what was going on was that I had to come home. That was very important. So in 2002, I made the plunge to come back to Fiji, which brought about another sort of crisis, because I left Fiji when I was 13. So all my adolescence and young adulthood, I had friends in Australia and overseas. I hadn't really made a network in Fiji. I had old friends from childhood who were here and very supportive. But I didn't have that sort of gang thing that everyone else seems to have that went to school here and all that sort of thing. So again, I came back to Fiji not feeling like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was Fijian. So it was another chapter in having to develop that. And what I did when I'm in these sort of moments of crises or whatever, I resorted back to my artwork, and I was at Dad's place at Sandy Point, and I just drew, and I started to create things out of Marcy and do screen printing onto Marcy. And I remember the first time I did an exhibition was at the Western Arts and Crafts Society. There was an exhibition in Denarau, and I did 30 pieces of Marcy artwork, so big, and beautiful box frames. And I marched up to Denarau and did the display there. And there's people there that I've known my whole life, like Craig Marlowe, who's a wonderful artist and friend, and other people like Maria Rover, who's head there, became a mentor to me. And within the first hour, I sold the whole lot. And I was like blown away. And I remember exactly who the lady was. It's how things work in Fiji. Her name was Dewani. And she came in and she bought the lot for Bobby Raniger, who owns Sogo shops in Nandi, the souvenir shops. And Dewani, I still know, she's still around today working at Pure Fiji. And I'm forever indebted to her for that just one single action was what sort of thought, I can do this, and this is something that I belong. And I think there was a lot of synchronicity. There's a lot of synchronicity in life. That I was in the right environment, I was home, I was creating stuff that I related to. So, and it was something that was marketable, which was fantastic. And then from there, my career in Fiji sort of broadened a bit. I did some interior design work with Castaway Island and with my mother's newly developed villa in Singatoka. And in doing that, I got a bit stuck. We could get products in Fiji, like tiles, but everything was sort of like Australian. And a friend of mine, or a cousin, said, well, have you tried Bali? I've got a friend there who's an agent. He sources in Bali. Why don't you try them out? So in 2003, Mum and I went to Bali for the first time. I was absolutely blown away. It was like artistic nirvana for me. I could create anything, and they could make it, which I couldn't do in Fiji. It was extraordinarily frustrating. I couldn't do that here, because they've got a culture there of artisans and designers and all that sort of thing that can make everything, and they use the same raw materials as we do. And that opened up a huge opportunity for me. So we could create interiors with my mum's villa in Castaway Island that everything was I designed and was Fijian, but it was able to be made over there. And through that connection, I got involved with Tapu in doing their head office refurbishment in Singatoka. The Tapu family have been my biggest sort of business collaboration of my career. And they lived literally behind me in Korotongo. And they didn't know about me at the time. It was the Bali connection that got me involved with Tapu. And I then got talking with one of the directors they were developing their brand in Tapu called Fiji Market. And the issue they had, which I saw quite quickly, was that they had all the same products in Fiji market as everybody else does. So they had war clubs, tanoas, masi, So they had nothing particularly unique or stand outish. So I suggested to them, I said, well, look, I can get things made in Bali with my designs, give them a Fijian flair, and you can bring them into the shops. And they went with that idea. And then much later on, I saw an opportunity as well, about 2008, that there was a gap in the market for women's clothing. And I had no fashion experience other than a textile design degree in printmaking. And I saw that there was no one, like I grew up with tiki togs, which a lot of you probably would remember. And they were huge in the 70s and 80s, with wonderful vivid prints in that. And I thought, why don't we do something like that? So I decided to make simple kaftans with big bold prints on them and put them into the market, primarily targeting the tourist market. And it was a great thing for me because it was artistic and creative and Fijian as well, and I thought that would be really good for tourists. Ironically, it took off much bigger than that because at the same time Fiji Fashion Week was developing and I started to show in Fiji Fashion Week proper collections each year. And it soon turned out that my biggest market was actually the Fijian market. And they, like me, always wanted to represent themselves, particularly the Fijians that are overseas. So they would wear my clothing and represent Fiji in that way. So that was how they could express themselves. And I had no idea about that. It was a whole new world of fashion and that sort of thing, which was amazing to see. I was really surprised by that. And now, to this day, my biggest boutique is Suva, and I get constant inquiries from overseas about my fashion for Fijians that are living over there. I wanted to talk about just briefly as well with how lucky I was to be allowed to be creative by my parents. Mum's always a very stylish person, was a big influence on me, and Dad was as well. And I was very lucky, and I'm conscious of that because so many kids these days don't have those opportunities. They're told by their parents they should become a lawyer or a doctor or da-da-da-da. And our education system doesn't support creatives as well. And so I've tried to do workshops in Fiji to sort of give back and mentor kids, particularly in jewelry making and things like that. But I really want there to be more talk about education, art in our curriculum, because there's nothing at the moment. And I firmly believe that the kids of today have got very limited opportunities without having that in their educational system. I think Fiji could be a much bigger, creative place. It's got all the potential in the world, but we just need to be given the opportunities to learn and explore those areas. I wanted to say that people are often asking me, like, what tips would you give to be a designer and young and up-and-coming designer? And my answer to that, I've learned, is to be passionate and to persevere and to not give up. And there are quite a lot of examples. Bar's one, I remember him when he first started out, and it was all about perseverance and passion and pushing forward. Even without education, if you're passionate about it, you can do it. Just on that note, I want to say that the whole full circle came around for me when I've won prizes and things like that, but the biggest prize was when I was allowed to go to the South Pacific Festival of Pacific Arts in Honiara and the Solomons. And that was the first time I'd been with a Fijian delegation. There was only 2 white Fijians. It was me and Sachiko Soro, and in a team of 140. And they had like an opening ceremony there, like the Olympics. And I marched out with pride in the whole crowd. And I really felt at home. I really felt that that was my sort of homecoming, like I was a Fijian, a creative and passionate about what I'm doing. And I remember meeting some Aboriginal girls afterwards from Australia. And they said to me, I said, Bulla, I'm from Fiji, my name's Robin. I said, yeah, you're like, we know. And I said, how do you know? She said, well, you're the only white one in the Fiji delegation, so we know that's where you are. So it was a full circle for me. So thank you very much.